Welcome back to another night of terror, brave souls. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 disturbing true horror stories. Real events that happen to real people. People just like you and me. These aren't fiction crafted to entertain. These are genuine experiences that changed lives forever, moments that blur the line between the explainable and the impossible. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, I want to know, where are you watching from right now and what time is it? Are you alone? Drop a comment below. I love seeing how far these stories travel, reaching people in different corners of the world at different hours. There's something uniquely unsettling about that, knowing some of you are reading this in broad daylight while others are alone in the dark. So hold on tight and prepare yourself. The darkness is closer than you think. Story 1. What lives beneath the surface? I was 11 years old when my family decided to spend a scorching July Saturday at Hidden Springs Lake, a private recreation area about 40 minutes outside our small Midwestern town. It wasn't a natural lake. Nothing about it was natural. Someone had excavated a massive pit decades earlier, lined it with industrial clay to prevent seepage, and filled it with well water and seasonal runoff. The owner had dumped pale sand along the edges, installed weathered picnic tables, anchored a floating dock in the deeper section, and called it a family beach. You paid $15 cash at a plywood shed near the entrance and parked wherever the grass wasn't cordoned off with orange tape. There were no lifeguards, no supervision beyond the owner occasionally walking the perimeter with a clipboard. Just families seeking relief from the heat in murky water that never quite looked clean. My younger brother Danny and I claimed a spot near the shallow end where the water appeared cloudy instead of the darker green that dominated the center. I could swim, barely, but not with any real confidence. The bottom of the lake had an unsettling habit of dropping away without warning, transforming from knee-deep to over your head in a single step. I developed a technique of moving through the water by hopping forward, letting my toes test the ground before committing my weight. It was slow and probably looked ridiculous, but it kept me safe. About 30 feet out from shore was a narrow sandbar that rose just high enough to sit on. Kids used it as a resting point before attempting the swim to the floating dock. That afternoon, I decided I was ready to reach it on my own. The lake was loud with competing radios and shouting children. Someone had dragged a charcoal grill dangerously close to the water's edge, and smoke drifted low across the surface. I remember the smell more than anything else, hot grease mixing with algae and something vaguely chemical that I couldn't identify. I started my careful journey toward the sandbar, hopping forward, testing each step. The water temperature shifted unpredictably, pockets of warmth followed by sudden cold that made my skin prickle. Halfway there, my right foot came down on something that didn't feel like the usual lake bottom. It wasn't mud. It wasn't rocks or the thick weeds that sometimes wrapped around your ankles. It had shape, structure. My toes slid along what felt like a curved ridge and then sank into something hollow, a cavity of some kind. For a confused second, I thought it might be a submerged tire or a piece of playground equipment that had been dumped there. Then I felt the strands. Thin, plant-like strands that brushed between my toes, moving with the current in a way that felt deliberately slow. The texture was wrong, not like lake vegetation but something finer, softer. I jerked my leg back violently, lost my balance, and went under. I swallowed a mouthful of that terrible-tasting water before my feet found solid bottom again. I surfaced coughing, eyes burning, and waded back toward shore as quickly as I could without looking like I was panicking. I sat on the beach wrapped in my towel, staring at my foot like it had betrayed me. There were no marks, no visible evidence of what I'd touched. I told myself it was probably just a submerged garbage bag or a clump of dead weeds. I felt embarrassed, childish for being so shaken. I didn't tell anyone what happened. About 15 minutes later, a woman near the floating dock started calling out a name. At first, her tone was casual, the way parents sound when their kids wander off to the bathroom or to get a snack. But within a minute, other voices joined in, and the casual concern transformed into something sharper. People stood up from their beach chairs. Radios were turned down, then off completely. The lake owner, a heavy-set man in his 60s, climbed onto the floating dock and blew a whistle so loud it hurt my ears. Everyone was ordered out of the water immediately. Parents grabbed towels and frantically counted heads. I watched families cluster together, relief visible on faces as children were accounted for. But one family remained standing, searching, calling the same name over and over. Connor. They were looking for someone named Connor. The owner mobilized volunteers, mostly adult men, who waded back into the water with pool skimming nets and lengths of rope. They moved in a rough search pattern, pushing the nets ahead of them like they were afraid of what they might encounter. My mom pulled Danny and me close and told us to stay on our towel. She wrapped me in a second towel I didn't need, and we sat there watching the grim choreography of the search unfold. I couldn't stop staring at the area near the sandbar, the place where my foot had touched that thing beneath the surface. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, 2 volunteers began dragging something toward shore using a net and rope. They kept it underwater, but I could see the surface around it had turned oddly smooth, the ripples flattening in a way that didn't look natural. An ambulance arrived, but they turned off the sirens before entering the property. The gate was closed and locked. No one else was allowed in or out. We couldn't see what they pulled from the water. Adults positioned themselves to block our view. But I saw enough. The careful way they moved, the abrupt silence that fell over everyone when the shape became visible, the way several people turned away. As we were ushered back to our car, I stopped at a spigot near the parking area to rinse my feet. When I turned on the water, I watched thin, dark strands circle the drain before disappearing. They were too fine to be algae, too deliberately shaped. I scrubbed my feet hard enough to hurt, but the memory of that texture wouldn't wash away. That night, lying in bed, my foot felt clean but somehow unfamiliar. Change. I said nothing during the drive home, nothing during dinner, nothing when my parents asked if I'd had fun at the lake. I couldn't find the words to explain that my foot had found something no one was supposed to touch. 2 weeks later, the lake reopened with new rules posted on bright yellow signs. Life vests required for children under 12. Roped-off swimming areas clearly marked. But when I drove past months later with my mom, I noticed the sandbar was gone. Completely gone. The shallow area had been scraped flat, reshaped, as if that section of the lake had never existed. I didn't understand what I had touched until the following Monday at school. 2 desks in the classroom next door sat empty. One belonged to a boy named Connor Mitchell who sometimes rode my bus. He was in 4th grade, 1 year ahead of me. I'd seen him that Saturday at the lake, racing toward the floating dock with another boy, both of them laughing. The teachers didn't explain the empty desks. They just said there had been an accident over the weekend and asked us not to gossip about it. By Wednesday, the school counselor had visited every classroom to talk about water safety and the importance of adult supervision. By Friday, everyone was talking anyway. Someone's older sister said Connor had drowned near the middle of the lake and they didn't find him for almost an hour. Someone else said the lake owner had ignored warnings about dangerous drop-offs and uneven depths. A kid in my class insisted Connor had gotten tangled in underwater weeds and couldn't free himself. No one mentioned the sandbar. No one talked about where exactly they'd recovered him. That weekend, my uncle, who had a background in civil engineering and an obsessive need to understand how things worked, called the number on the lake's information sign. He asked pointed questions about depth charts, bottom composition, and safety protocols. He was told Connor had drowned near the floating dock. A tragic accident. The family was grieving privately. The lake had passed all safety inspections and would reopen the following weekend with enhanced supervision. End of story. My uncle didn't believe it, but he let it go. The lake did reopen 2 weeks later. Fresh sand had been dumped along the entire shore. Bright orange ropes sectioned off areas by depth. New signs warned about underwater hazards. Attendance was half of what it used to be. My family never went back. My mom said it didn't feel right anymore, that the place had changed. She didn't know how right she was. I tried to forget about that Saturday. I focused on other things, school, friends, the approaching summer break. But my mind kept replaying that moment. The shape beneath my foot. The hollow cavity. The strands moving through the water with that terrible, deliberate slowness. I started scrubbing my feet every night before bed until my mom asked why my heels were cracked and bleeding. I told her the pool at the community center had rough concrete. She believed me. About a year later, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when I overheard my parents talking in low voices. The lake had closed again. Permanently this time. There had been a lawsuit, Connor's family versus the property owner. During the legal proceedings, the owner had been forced to partially drain the lake to allow an independent inspection of the clay liner and structural integrity. The inspection team found shopping carts, broken glass, construction debris, rusted metal drums, and something else they wouldn't describe in the official report. My dad mentioned it quietly, like lowering his voice could somehow make the information less disturbing. They found remains, he said. Multiple. Going back years. My mom had asked him not to discuss it further, not with me in the next room. But I'd already heard enough. When I was 16, I got a summer job at a grocery store near the road that led to the old lake property. One evening, an older man came through my checkout lane wearing a faded gray t-shirt with the lake's logo, a smiling sun over stylized water. I recognized it instantly, and my hands slowed as I scanned his items. He noticed the change in my rhythm. "Used to be a nice place," he said, not looking directly at me. "Till people stopped following the rules. Till management cut corners. Shame what happened." I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice. He paid and left without another word. Years later, when I was home from college, curiosity finally overcame my unease. I drove past where the entrance used to be. The wooden sign was gone. The access road had been blocked with concrete barriers. The pit itself was fenced with chain link topped by barbed wire. It had partially refilled with rainwater and overgrown with weeds. No sand, no dock, no picnic tables. Just a low area collecting runoff and slowly returning to nature. I sat in my parked car staring through the fence. I didn't get out. I didn't walk closer. There was nothing to see, and yet I couldn't look away. Eventually, I started the car and drove home. I'm 28 now. I still won't wade into cloudy water. I don't swim in natural lakes or ponds, only pools where I can see the bottom clearly. When people ask about childhood summers and favorite swimming spots, I keep my answers vague. When my girlfriend suggested we take her nephew to a local lake last summer, I made excuses until she stopped asking. She thinks I'm being overprotective. She doesn't understand that some lessons are learned in ways that never leave you. I learned that sometimes the bottom is already occupied, and the water doesn't warn you first. It just lets you touch something you were never meant to find. The official report eventually surfaced online. I found it one sleepless night, scrolling through scanned documents in a digital archive. The language was careful, technical, designed to communicate facts without implications. Time of submersion estimated between 45 to 60 minutes. Visibility noted as poor due to suspended sediment. Recovery location marked with a vague circle on a depth chart that overlapped with where the sandbar used to be. The report didn't contradict what I remembered, but it didn't confirm it either. It existed in that gray area of official documentation. True enough to satisfy legal requirements, vague enough to protect everyone involved. After reading it once, I closed the browser tab and cleared my history. I've never searched for it again. Some things stay unofficial forever, passed quietly between the people who were there and learned to keep moving forward. I'm one of those people now. I carry that Saturday with me, the texture, the strands, the shape beneath my foot. And sometimes, late at night, I still feel phantom sensations between my toes. The memory of something hollow and hidden, waiting beneath the surface for someone to find it. I just wish it hadn't been me. Story 2, The Call from the Dead. 10 years ago, something happened that I still can't fully explain, despite every rational attempt I've made to reduce it to logic and circumstance. I'm not the kind of person who looks for signs or assigns meaning to coincidences. I work in network infrastructure, telecommunications compliance and data routing. I understand how systems work. I trust technology because I know its limitations. What happened challenged all of that. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was at my desk reviewing audit reports when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Miles Whitaker, a neighborhood friend from childhood I hadn't spoken to in several months. "Hey man, I have some bad news." Miles sounded strained, like he'd been preparing himself to make this call. "It's about Ethan Calder. He's dead." The words didn't process immediately. Ethan Calder. We'd grown up on the same street in suburban Connecticut, spent countless summer evenings riding bikes through the neighborhood, shared too many stupid teenage decisions to count. We weren't inseparable, but he'd always felt like a permanent fixture in my life. One of those friendships you assume will always be there in some form. We'd drifted over the years, of course. Different cities, different careers, different routines. But we'd maintained sporadic contact through email, brief check-ins every few months, forwarded articles about shared interests, the occasional "how's life treating you" message that never required much depth. What happened? I managed to ask. Miles explained what he knew. Ethan had been found dead in his apartment in Portland. The circumstances weren't entirely clear yet, but it appeared he'd been there for some time before being discovered. Ethan lived alone, worked freelance as a technical writer with irregular pay schedules. He'd become famously disconnected from modern technology over the years. No smartphone, no social media presence, just an old landline phone mounted in his kitchen and a desktop computer he used exclusively for work. "They think it had been at least 2 weeks, Miles said quietly. "Maybe longer." The building superintendent finally entered after other tenants complained about a smell. That detail made my stomach turn. 2 weeks. Possibly more. Ethan had been alone in that apartment, and nobody had noticed he was gone. In our connected, constantly communicating world, he'd managed to disappear without anyone realizing for over 2 weeks. The funeral was scheduled for that Friday. I told Miles I'd be there, but I couldn't attend. That same week, I received notification of a mandatory training course in Phoenix that I couldn't postpone, a compliance certification required for my job. The timing felt wrong, disrespectful even, but I had no choice. I sent flowers to the service and made my flight to Arizona. On the second morning of the training, I was seated in a windowless hotel conference room with about 30 other telecommunications professionals. The instructor was mid-presentation on updated federal routing protocols when my phone vibrated against the desk. I glanced down reflexively. The caller ID showed Ethan Calder. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. For a long moment, I convinced myself it was a glitch, some delayed notification from weeks ago finally pushing through the system. But the timestamp was current. Right now. 9:47 a.m. I didn't answer. There were too many people around me and the instructor was still talking. I flipped the phone face down and tried to focus on the presentation, but my thoughts had scattered completely. The call rang through to voicemail. During the lunch break, I stepped outside into the Phoenix heat and checked my call log, half expecting the entry to have disappeared. It was still there. Incoming call from Ethan Calder's number at 9:47 a.m. Duration: 38 seconds before it went to voicemail. My hands were shaking slightly as I dialed the number back. It rang 6 times, then cut to a generic automated message. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again. I tried twice more with the same result. I spent the rest of the day distracted, running through possibilities. Phone numbers get reassigned after accounts are closed. There's always a delay in the system. Someone, a family member, maybe, or the building superintendent, must have access to Ethan's apartment and accidentally triggered a redial or something. Except Ethan didn't have a mobile phone. His number was a landline. And according to Miles, Ethan had been found over a week ago. His apartment would have been sealed, his affairs being handled by his sister who lived in Boston. That night, unable to sleep in the hotel room, I pulled up my archived emails from Ethan. The last message he'd sent me was dated 3 weeks before he was found. It was brief, characteristically dry. Still traveling as much as you used to? I was thinking about that summer we drove to Quebec on a dare. We were idiots. Anyway, hope you're doing well. I'd responded 2 days later with a short reply about work travel and a joke about that Quebec trip. He never responded. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Ethan's communication style was irregular at best. Now, looking at that final message, I felt a weight I couldn't quite name. I told myself the phone call was a strange coincidence I didn't yet understand. Systems fail in unexpected ways. I worked adjacent to telecommunications infrastructure. I knew about routing errors, delayed signals, ghost calls generated by faulty switching equipment. None of that knowledge made me feel better. I eventually fell asleep sometime after 2 a.m., convinced I'd forget about the call once the training course ended and I returned to normal routines. I was wrong. On the third day of the course, I woke before my alarm to find my phone lit up on the nightstand. Missed call notification. Same number. Same name. Ethan Calder. Timestamp, 2:17 a.m. I hadn't heard it ring. My phone had been on the nightstand less than 3 feet from my head, and I'd heard nothing. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the notification, trying to force my mind into analytical mode. There had to be an explanation. Equipment malfunction. Database error. Something. After the morning session, I called my carrier's customer service line from the hotel room. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. A friend had passed away, but I was receiving calls from his number. I needed to understand how that was possible. The representative checked my account and call logs. After several minutes on hold, she came back with information that made my skin go cold. The calls are completing normally from a registered copper landline, she said. The number hasn't been reassigned or marked for closure yet. The account is still active, though it's flagged for termination pending estate settlement. But that's impossible, I said. The person who owned that line has been dead for over 2 weeks. Pause. I understand this is difficult, sir. But according to our system, those calls originated from a functioning physical line. There's no spoofing, no call forwarding, no technical anomalies. The calls were placed from that address. After the call ended, I sat in the hotel room trying to rationalize what I'd just been told. Landlines don't dial themselves. Someone had to physically pick up the receiver and dial my number. Twice. That evening, I drove to a regional carrier office and asked to speak with a technician. I'd worked with some of their staff years earlier on infrastructure audits, and I managed to connect with someone who remembered me. I explained the situation. He pulled deeper routing records and confirmed what customer service had told me. The calls were completing cleanly, originating from Ethan's registered address, no anomalies in the signal path. Landlines don't dial themselves, he said, echoing my own thoughts. Someone has to initiate the call physically. Is it possible someone is in the apartment? I didn't have an answer for that. That night, while I was eating alone in the hotel restaurant, my phone rang again. I answered before I could stop myself. Hello? Silence. Not the empty silence of a dead line, but something else. Background presence. A low ambient hum like open air moving through a room. Ethan? I said his name once, feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. The call disconnected. I didn't sleep. When the training course ended the next day, I flew home a day early and drove directly from the airport to Ethan's apartment building in Portland. The building superintendent, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, recognized me from years earlier when I'd visited Ethan. I explained who I was and asked if I could see the apartment. She hesitated, then agreed. We're waiting for the cleaning company. The sister already came by and took his personal effects, but the place is still sealed. She unlocked the door and let me inside. The apartment was stripped and empty. Furniture removed. Personal items gone. Just bare walls and scuffed floors waiting for renovation. But the kitchen still had the old wall-mounted phone in place. A beige rotary model that Ethan had kept for reasons he'd never fully explained. The cord was unplugged. The receiver rested correctly in its cradle. Can I check the line? I asked. The superintendent nodded. I plugged the cord back into the wall jack and waited. The phone rang. The sound was loud in that empty apartment. A harsh, mechanical bell that seemed to echo off the bare walls. I watched it ring 3 times, then 4. I didn't pick up. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed felt heavy, expectant. That's odd, the superintendent said. The line should be disconnected by now. I left without touching the phone again. Over the next week, I used my industry contacts to request official call records. The data took several days to compile, but when I finally received it, the information was clear and impossible to dismiss. 3 calls had been placed from Ethan's landline number after his estimated time of death. All had routed cleanly through the system. All had connected to my mobile number. 1 had been answered. I filed the information away and contacted Ethan's sister to inform her the line needed to be officially disconnected through the estate paperwork. She was confused. She thought she'd already handled that, but she followed up with the carrier and had the service terminated within 48 hours. The calls stopped immediately. I changed my mobile number that same month. I stopped saving contacts by name, using only initials or company identifications instead. When people asked why, I gave vague answers about spam calls and privacy. A year later, while conducting a routine infrastructure audit for a client, I noticed that Ethan's old address still appeared in a legacy database, marked as an active line. I submitted a correction ticket and watched the record update to disconnected. Nothing like that has happened since. No more late-night alerts. No unexplained calls. No missed calls from numbers that shouldn't work. I documented everything for myself. Dates, times, call durations, routing records. I stored the files offline, encrypted in a folder I rarely open. If there was an explanation, it existed somewhere outside my understanding of how telecommunication systems function. I don't speculate anymore. I verify, archive, and move forward, because that's the only way this remains a documented anomaly instead of something I can't process. I still work in network infrastructure. I still trust systems and protocols and the logical flow of data. But I no longer assume every signal has a living source. And when my phone rings late at night from an unknown number, I let it go to voicemail. Always. Because some calls aren't meant to be answered. And some questions don't have answers that help you sleep better. That's all I have. Exactly as it happened, exactly as I documented it. No theories, no conclusions. Just records, timestamps, and the knowledge that for 3 days in October, something or someone used a dead man's phone to reach me. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know what I would have heard if I'd answered that 3rd call. And I've made peace with never knowing. Story 3, the floor that shouldn't exist. I was renting a small studio apartment in a 12-story high-rise near the industrial district when this happened. The building wasn't dangerous enough to warrant serious complaint, just worn down in ways you learn to ignore. Peeling paint in the hallways, flickering fluorescent lights, and an elevator everyone joked about but still trusted because it had never seriously failed. The elevator was ancient, installed probably in the 1960s, before digital panels and smooth electronic controls. It had physical metal buttons that stayed warm after being pressed, a groaning mechanical system you could hear grinding between floors, and a tendency to stop slightly too hard, jerking passengers enough to make them grab the handrails. Management blamed normal wear and promised upgrades that never materialized. Most residents accepted this explanation without thinking much deeper. It was just part of living in an affordable building in an expensive city. One Tuesday night, I got home close to midnight after working a double shift at the hospital where I worked as a medical records clerk. The lobby was busier than usual for that hour. Apparently a delayed commuter train had just unloaded passengers nearby. People poured into the building at once, filling the elevator beyond what felt comfortable. I ended up near the back wall, boxed in by winter coats, backpacks, and a man in a delivery uniform who smelled like cigarettes and coffee. We were packed tight enough that I couldn't have reached the control panel if I'd wanted to. As the elevator lurched upward, the overhead lights dimmed briefly, then returned. The woman next to me glanced at the ceiling, but no one said anything. Silence felt safer than drawing attention to potential problems. When we reached the 4th floor, the doors opened halfway and stopped, like the elevator was reconsidering whether to commit to the floor. After a hesitation that felt too long, they slid fully apart. A man in a gray maintenance uniform stepped forward toward the opening, then stopped abruptly. He was looking down the hallway with an expression I couldn't quite read, confusion mixed with something else. Unease maybe. Or recognition of something that didn't belong. After a moment, he shook his head slightly and stepped back into the elevator without getting out. The doors began closing faster than normal, not waiting for anyone else to exit. The maintenance man, still standing in the doorway area, reacted too late. He tried to step out at the last second, but the metal panels came together with unexpected force, catching his shoulder and pinning him at an awkward angle. He shouted, more startled than pained, and asked someone to help. Instinctively, several of us pushed at the doors, trying to force them apart. They felt locked in place, immovable like they'd been welded shut. Then the elevator lurched upward. Someone screamed. Others yelled to hit the emergency button. I pressed it repeatedly, then tried the alarm button. Nothing happened. No bell, no response, no indication the system had registered the emergency. The maintenance man was being dragged upward as the elevator moved, still pinned in the closing doors. He struggled, trying to pull himself free, making a strangled sound that I can still hear when I close my eyes. After several horrifying seconds, the elevator stopped with a violent jolt that threw us all forward. The sudden deceleration slammed me against the person in front of me, and I heard someone's phone clatter to the floor. In that moment of stillness, the doors loosened just enough for the maintenance man to wrench himself free. He collapsed onto the floor of the elevator, gasping, holding his shoulder. His face had gone pale, and he wouldn't look at anyone. He just sat there breathing hard, eyes fixed on the floor. Without explanation or warning, the elevator resumed moving upward. When the doors finally opened on my floor, the 7th, nobody moved at first. We stood there listening to the mechanical hum, waiting for another failure, another malfunction, another moment of terror. Eventually, people began stepping out in complete silence. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. We scattered to our separate apartments like survivors of something we couldn't yet name. The maintenance man remained on the floor as I exited. I glanced back once and saw him still sitting there, cradling his arm, staring at nothing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the 4th floor, about the way that man had looked down the hallway before deciding not to exit. What had he seen? What had made him change his mind? Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and opened my laptop. The building had an online tenant directory, listing all occupied units, recent move-outs, scheduled maintenance. I searched for the 4th floor. According to the directory, the 4th floor showed no current tenants. No recent move-outs. No scheduled renovations or maintenance work. The entire floor was marked inactive, sealed for structural assessment. I refreshed the page thinking it was a database error. The information remained the same. The 4th floor wasn't supposed to be accessible. There shouldn't have been any reason for the elevator to stop there or for anyone to attempt to exit. I closed my laptop and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop churning. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that hallway, the 4th floor, dimly lit and supposedly empty, yet somehow active enough to trigger the elevator doors. The next morning, I decided to ask the night concierge about it. The building maintained a skeleton overnight staff, and the desk was usually manned by a young guy named Eric who always looked too tired to care about anything. I explained what had happened in the elevator and mentioned the inactive floor listing. Eric frowned, pulling up something on the computer. 4th floor, he said slowly. Yeah, no one's supposed to be there. We haven't had tenants on that floor in Hell, I don't even know how long. It's been closed off since before I started working here. But the elevator stopped there last night, I said. And a man tried to get out. Eric leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. That's weird. The fourth floor landing should be locked from both sides. Even if the elevator stops there, the doors on the landing shouldn't open. You sure it was the fourth floor? Positive. I saw the floor indicator. He shook his head. I don't know what to tell you. That floor's not safe. Structural damage from a water leak years ago, I think. Maybe some electrical issues too. Nobody goes there. Not even maintenance unless it's some kind of emergency. What kind of structural damage? I asked. I don't know the details. Before my time. But it's completely sealed off now. He paused. You didn't go out there, did you? No. But someone tried to. Who? Maintenance guy. Gray uniform. Eric's expression shifted slightly. We don't have a maintenance guy on nights. They're all day shift. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Are you sure? Positive. I'm the only building staff here overnight except for the security guard who does rounds. What did this guy look like? I described him, middle-aged, gray uniform, about 6 feet tall, stocky build. Eric stared at me for a long moment. That doesn't match any of our maintenance staff. And they definitely wouldn't be here at midnight. I left the desk trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe the man was a contractor or a repair technician called in for an emergency. Maybe Eric just didn't know about it. But that night, coming home again around 11:30 p.m., I hesitated before calling the elevator. When it arrived and the doors opened, I stood in the lobby staring at the empty car. I took the stairs instead. 7 flights, but I didn't care. For the next 2 weeks, I avoided the elevator entirely. I became very familiar with the stairwell, the echo of footsteps on concrete, the slight chemical smell from whatever they used to clean, the way the emergency lights cast long shadows through the wire-reinforced windows. But the stairwell meant passing the fourth floor landing every trip up and down. And each time I passed that door, marked with a faded 4 and a strip of yellow caution tape across the handle, I felt an irrational urge to stop, to try the door, to see what was on the other side. I never did. Late one night, around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard the elevator moving in the shaft. My apartment was close enough to hear it, the mechanical groan of the cables, the subtle vibration through the walls. I heard it stop. Then the doors open. Then close. Then the elevator moved again. This happened 3 times in the space of 10 minutes. I pulled up the building's rudimentary security app on my phone. Residents had access to a camera feed showing the lobby. The lobby was empty. No one was calling the elevator. I watched the elevator move on its own for 20 minutes, stopping at floors with no passengers, doors opening to empty hallways, then closing and moving again. It stopped most frequently on the 4th floor. 3 weeks later, I finally encountered someone else who'd experienced something similar. Her name was Margaret, an older woman who'd lived in the building for 15 years. We ended up in the laundry room at the same time, and she noticed I was carrying my laundry basket down 7 flights of stairs instead of using the elevator. Don't trust it either, huh? She said with a knowing smile. Not really, I admitted. She nodded. Smart. That elevator's been trouble since the incident. What incident? Margaret looked at me carefully, as if deciding whether to share something she'd kept to herself for a long time. Back in the 80s, a tenant got stuck between floors. The 4th floor specifically. They were doing repairs or maintenance or something, and the elevator malfunctioned during the work. The person was pinned in the doors for over an hour before they got them out. Serious injuries, crushed shoulder, internal bleeding. My skin prickled. Did they survive? Barely. But the building covered it up, calling it an accident, settling with the family quietly. They never properly fixed the elevator mechanics, just patched it enough to keep running. And they sealed off the 4th floor permanently, claimed it was for structural reasons. Why didn't they fix the elevator properly? Money. Always money. Easier to seal one floor and keep collecting rent from everyone else than to replace an entire elevator system. She paused, loading clothes into a washing machine. Strange things have happened with that elevator ever since. People report it stopping at the 4th floor even though it's not supposed to. Doors opening to a floor that should be locked and empty. Have you ever seen anything? Margaret closed the washing machine lid and looked at me directly. Once. About 8 years ago. I was coming home late, got in the elevator alone. It stopped at the 4th floor. Doors opened. And I swear to God, I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. Just standing there in the dark, facing the elevator. What did you do? I pressed my floor button about 20 times until the doors closed. Never rode that elevator alone at night again. I moved out 6 weeks later. I told my landlord it was because of a job relocation, but that wasn't true. I just couldn't stay in that building anymore, knowing there was a sealed floor above me where someone, seemed to be waiting. Years later, I looked up the building's history through public records. I found documentation of the incident Margaret had described, buried in city archives. A tenant named Donald Reese had been severely injured in an elevator malfunction in 1984. The building management had settled out of court. The fourth floor had been closed pending structural repairs that were never completed. I also found something else. In the 3 decades since the incident, there had been 17 separate complaints filed with the city about the elevator stopping at the fourth floor. 17 different tenants reporting doors opening to a floor that was supposed to be permanently sealed. None of the complaints had resulted in action. The building management maintained that the fourth floor remained locked and inaccessible, that any elevator stops there were due to button malfunctions or electrical anomalies. I don't know if the maintenance man I saw that night was real or something else. I don't know who Margaret saw in that darkened hallway. And I don't know why that elevator continues to stop at a floor that shouldn't exist in any functional sense. All I know is that old buildings can hold memories in their infrastructure. Trauma can imprint itself on places in ways we don't understand. And some doors, once they close on someone, create echoes that never quite fade. I live in a newer building now, only 4 stories with modern elevators and security systems. But I still check floor numbers carefully before entering any elevator. I still notice when buildings have missing floor numbers or gaps in their apartment listings. And I never, ever ignore that instinct that tells me not to get out when doors open to a floor that feels wrong. Because I learned that some spaces exist between what's officially real and what actually happens. And the fourth floor, that sealed, supposedly empty floor, lives in that space. Waiting for the next person who doesn't listen to their instincts. Waiting for doors to open one more time. 3 stories. 3 experiences that defy easy explanation. Real events that happened to real people who are still trying to make sense of what they encountered. I want to thank everyone who shared these accounts with me. Reliving trauma takes courage, especially when that trauma challenges your understanding of reality itself. These stories matter because they remind us that the world contains more than what we can easily explain or comfortably accept. What connects all 3 experiences is this. Sometimes, we encounter things that resist rational explanation. Sometimes, we touch what we weren't meant to find, receive calls from numbers that shouldn't work, or visit floors that don't officially exist. And sometimes, the only honest response is to document what happened and acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. If these stories resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe. Share them with someone who understands that reality has edges we haven't fully mapped. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, the darkness is always closer than you think.